This is the Ed Franklin No Limits podcast. My name is Ed Franklin. Thank you for joining me today. It's been a while since I've done a podcast. Actually, I think I've only done one this year after doing over 100 in the last couple of years. And I can tell you that I am back in the game and ready to do another 100 episodes or more as soon as I can get my feet under me. And I do have them. I'll tell you why I haven't done any podcasts in a minute, but you can always contact me at edfranklin.nolimits@gmail.com. If you have somebody or you're somebody that has a really interesting story, I'd love to hear it. Love to get you on the podcast and just talk about, getting over limitations, telling our story, self-esteem, excuses. These are the four kind of pillars of the podcast. And one of the reasons I called it No Limits is we really don't have to stick to those four things either. We can kind of do whatever we want. It's my podcast. We'll do whatever we want. And that's the great thing about podcasts, right? We can do whatever we want. We can use bad language, not that we need to or will, but you can. So anyway, thank you again for listening. If you're a new listener, those are our four pillars. Like I said, getting over limitations, telling your story, excuses, and self-esteem. So we know that the self-esteem is probably the lowest it's been in the history of America, especially over the last 10 years and primarily over the last 5 years after COVID started. And when COVID started, as most of you know, I lost my job almost right away because my job was to get people in a room and talk to each other and network. And obviously we couldn't do that because we weren't allowed. So it's been kind of a struggle over the last 4 years. And one of the things I did, probably the smartest thing I did during that 4 years when COVID started, was kind of find myself, right? And more so, not finding myself, but finding what my passion is about and what I really want to do when I grow up. And I've always wanted to do public speaking. And I would have people tell me, listen, you're a great motivator. You get us all pumped up when you talk to us and things like that. And that's all great. I'm glad for that. The problem with motivation is an emotion and it generally doesn't stick with us unless you're just one of those driven people like I think I am. Like I'm up 3:45 every morning going to the gym, meet the guy at 5 o'clock when he opens the doors. I say motivated. I just have that discipline to do that. I decided that about 10 months ago and I'm continuing to do that. I was at the gym this morning at 5 o'clock. So motivation's great. Inspiration's great. But what I kind of really found that I really wanted people to do is think about what's holding them back. What's that, what is limiting them and what they want to do in their dreams and things like that. And what I find a lot when I talk to people, I tend to get people to open up to me and tell me their stories. And they're generally not great stories. They're generally something that's weighing on them very heavy. Maybe they have a family member they're taking care of, or maybe they've had a death in the family that was very, impactful to them. And they have teenagers and maybe the kids are having problems. And I've told this story before. I met this CEO of a company when I was selling promotional items, and we were on a webinar, and this guy was super sharp. I was really impressed with how smart this guy was and how he could articulate all of his products, and he just had a really good grasp of his job and what his goals were and things like that. A couple weeks later, we saw him at a function out in Palm Springs. It was like a trade show. And I was telling him about the podcast. We were out, having a drink at before we went to dinner. And his demeanor kind of changed a little bit. And he says, man, I wish I could get my kids to listen to your podcast because, and he starts telling me about his kids, the way they're behaving. But the biggest problem, it wasn't the way they were behaving, is that his wife was not on the same page of how to discipline those kids. Maybe she was letting them do a little bit more than he wanted them to do, or whatever the case was. There was definitely a conflict. And he got really choked up talking about this. This is something that was weighing very heavy on his mind. And I thought, here's a guy that is so buttoned up when it comes to his business, but his personal life is just kind of a train wreck in that situation. And I don't know if that's improved or not. I haven't spoken to him in a couple of years.